Often, when a wrestler who started out in WWE ends up getting cut from their contract, this marks the end of their career, as unwilling to rebuild themselves on the indies, they're rarely, if ever, heard from again. But that's not the case for everyone. No, some use the minor leagues as a place to have a fresh start, all en route towards heading back to the top. And a rare few, well, they make the minors their home and help to elevate this level of the industry with their sheer presence alone. And that's exactly what Matt Cardona has done. But how did he get to this point? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into his career journey so far in Always Ready, the Matt Cardona Story. Matthew Brett Cardona was born in Merrick, New York on May 14, 1985, and it was there he went through some difficulties during childhood. As well in high school, he'd be diagnosed with a rare illness called synovial sarcoma. Needless to say then, this must have been a scary time for young Matt, but thankfully he'd pull through and would enter remission, with this being a place he has remained right up until the present day. And it was also during his childhood that Matt would start his dream of one day becoming a professional wrestler. Yes, ever since a young age, Matt had always been a huge wrestling fan, and that was why it was in 2004 that upon graduating, he'd start training in the ways of the ring under former ECW World Champion Mikey Whipwreck. Would being trained by Whipwreck open some doors for Matt in the local New York scene? Yes, it would. In fact, only a few months after starting his training, the rookie would already be getting bookings at the New York Wrestling Connection. And it would be there he'd largely remain for the next couple of years as he slowly built a name for himself, going by the ring name of Brett Matthews and teaming with Brian Myers in a series of tag team bouts. So much of a name would Matt build here, in fact, by the time his run there was over, both he and Brian would be two-time NYWC Tag Team Champions. But this would only be the beginning for the pair as it happened, because things were about to skyrocket to an all-new level for them when, in 2005, they found themselves being signed up to developmental contracts with WWE. That's right, after taking note of their work on the indies, WWE brought Cardona and Myers in, and after giving the former a cameo appearance on an episode of SmackDown where he jobbed out to Matt Morgan in short order, sent them down to Deep South Wrestling where they could learn the WWE style. Not that the Merrick native would be going by either his real name or the name of Brett Matthews in DSW though. No, there he'd be rebranded as Brett Major, all while his partner would be renamed Brian Major. Ultimately though, it didn't matter what moniker they were going by. No, all that mattered was how they were performing in the ring. And how they were performing was great, because pretty soon they'd have become DSW Tag Team Champions after beating the Untouchables for the honor. And that wasn't the only time the major players held the gold in Deep South either. In fact, like with their time in NYWC, they'd also become two-time champions in Georgia as well. Then, when DSW stopped being WWE's developmental system and Ohio Valley Wrestling became the place to go for young rookies under contract to Vince McMahon instead, the major players would head over there and win their OVW Southern Tag Team Championships too. But of course, all of this was just table setting for what was to come, as in 2007, 2 years after signing their WWE contracts, the pair would finally get that main roster call-up, and they'd get it in a big way. What was so big about this particular call-up? Well, it involved Matt and Brian, now going by the names of Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins, being put into Edge's heel stable La Familia. That's right, in their first order of business on SmackDown, the two up-and-comers would be placed right into a main event program, and with one of Matt's favorite wrestlers, no less. Obviously then, this was a dream come true for the New Yorker, as it saw him get a perfect opportunity to sit under the learning tree of a legend like Edge. And while this was all happening off-screen, on-screen, Ryder and Hawkins would prove to be a regular thorn in the side of any opponents the Rated R superstar was going up against that month, as with them being kayfabe acquaintances of Edge's kayfabe wife, they had all the motivation they needed to help keep the World Heavyweight title around his waist. But it wasn't all just about keeping the title on the leader of the group. No, the Rated R entourage, as they would come to be known by commentary for a while, also had their sights set upon winning gold of their own. And that soon led them to going after then WWE Tag Team Champions John Morrison and The Miz. Sure, they weren't the only ones going after these belts. No, Jesse and Festus and Finlay and Hornswoggle were also in the chase, but in the end, neither of these teams would be the one to stand tall by the time all was said and done, and a fatal four-way bout between each of the pairings hit the ring at July 20th, 2008's Great American Bash. No, the team who would come out on top here would be none other than the Rated R entourage, with this giving them yet another set of tag team gold to add to their trophy case. Of course, this was different from any gold they'd won before, though. This was main roster WWE gold. And now the champions, Ryder and Hawkins, would go on to defend this as if it was the most precious thing in their lives. That said, as with all good things, their run on top couldn't last forever. No, it was on the September 26th episode of SmackDown that the pair would drop the titles to the Colognes. And as if that wasn't bad enough, by then La Familia had begun to fall apart too, leading to the rated R entourage suddenly not having a family around them anymore. Still, at least they had each other, right? Well, not anymore, because during the 2009 draft, Zack and Kurt would be split up, with the former at this point being sent down to WWE CW. But while this could have been bad for him, in the end it was the best thing that ever happened for the Merrick boy, as it was here that he was able to let his creativity fly and come up with a character which would truly get him over. What was this character? Well, it was that of the Long Island loudmouth, a brash Jersey boy who looked like he'd stepped straight off the set of Jersey Shore. Needless to say then, this made him an instant heel in fans' eyes, but even if he was being roundly booed every time he bust out one of his trademark quotes like "woo woo woo, you know it," this didn't matter to Zack Ryder. No, all that mattered to him was that for the first time in his career, he was truly over on a big stage. How little did he know then that this was only the beginning? Yes, things were going to get much bigger for the New Yorker soon enough, way bigger than anyone could ever have imagined. Before that happened though, he'd continue to work his way up the card on WWE ECW by putting on strong showings against the likes of Finlay, Christian, and ECW original Tommy Dreamer. Hell, he'd actually be the one who'd get kayfabe credit for forcing the innovator of violence to exit the formerly Extreme brand once and for all in December of that year. Truly a heel move if we ever saw one. And all this meant that once WWE ECW was canceled in February of 2010 and many on the roster there were worried about whether or not they'd still have a job going forward, Zack had no reason to feel any concern, because as one of the bright spots there during its dying days, it would be a no-brainer he'd be brought back up to the main roster proper at this point, albeit this time on Raw instead of SmackDown. That's right, now a Red Brand regular, Ryder would get back to work on starting his own revolution when he found a new valet in Alicia Fox. Unfortunately for him, though, this association with Fox proved to be short-lived, as in June of 2010, mere weeks after his call-up to Monday nights, he would be turned on by Foxy. So that left him alone all over again and forced to regroup as his plans for domination of Raw went back to square one. But even if this was a low point for Zack, it wouldn't mean he'd remain at the bottom for long. No, by the time August came around, he'd be getting a chance to challenge Sheamus for the WWE title, albeit unsuccessfully, and by the time the autumn was dawning, he'd find himself in a position of authority when he became a mentor to Titus O'Neil on the second season of NXT, back when it was in its game show format. Sure, this might not have been where he wanted to be long term, but it was better than doing nothing, so Ryder made the most of the situation and did his best to impress his bosses every time he was on screen on NXT. In the end, though, this didn't work out the way he'd hoped it would, because once NXT came to an end, the New Yorker would be relegated to working on Superstars for the rest of the year and well into the next. What he needed then was something to really shake things up for him, something which would prove he had a lot more to offer WWE outside of being a lower card act. So that was why he took to the internet. Yes, in one of the earliest examples of a wrestler making the internet work for them, Zack created a YouTube web series in 2011 named the Z True Long Island Story, where he would treat us all to the regular exploits of his character, as well as some of his real-life antics, such as toy collecting. And to a young audience who were fast making YouTube their main source of media, Zack Ryder found himself getting hugely over as something of a cult sensation. So over would he get, in fact, he'd even get his own belt for the channel, the Internet Championship. Not that this would lead to a push for him right away or anything. No, even though WWE did make Z True Long Island Story a part of their official YouTube channel, bookers in WWE still didn't want to make Long Island Ice Z a more focused upon character on television. Of course, fans disagreed with such an assessment, however, and that was how, over the course of the next year or so, the Ryder Revolution would gradually pick up steam on WWE TV as fans started to chant Zack's name during shows in what served as a precursor for the Yes Movement. Unlike with the Yes Movement, though, this revolution would not lead to Cardona making it all the way up to the top of the card in WWE. No, even when live crowds hijacked a segment featuring The Rock to let the company know they wanted more Ryder, WWE still didn't have plans for him to be placed at the top of the card. However, as time went on, Zack would get a more prominent spot on TV as the assistant general manager of SmackDown in July of 2011, and after this, he would gain even more success as he would have a US title run which began when he beat Dolph Ziggler at TLC, Tables, Ladders, and Chairs in December of that same year. Yes, this would be a huge moment for Ryder as it proved that he could compete on the next level up on the card. Sadly though, this push wouldn't go on forever as 2012 started out with Long Island IceZ finding not only a new ally in John Cena, but also a new on-screen girlfriend in Eve Torres, only for things to dramatically fall to the point that by the time February rolled around, he'd have dropped his US title to Jack Swagger, would have to watch on as Cena and Eve made out in front of him, then would suffer the final indignance of being put into a wheelchair and rolled off of the entrance ramp by Kane. So bad did things get that many fans started to lose faith in the character of Zack Ryder, who had for a time been their hero. No, by now it was clear that the Ryder revolution had ended. That said, the person the whole situation hurt the most remained Matt Cardona, because he was the one who had greatness within his grasp, only for it to be pulled away at the last minute. Still, even if this was the case, what else could he do but keep going on? So that's exactly what he did by doing whatever was asked of him going forward, whether this was having matches on Main Event or occasionally showing up on Raw to do jobs to more focused upon stars like Cody Rhodes and Antonio Cesaro. So bad did things get for Zack, in fact, that in 2013 he'd lose every single televised match he had on Raw and SmackDown. Hell, even when he did get put into a mini feud with an act like The Shield, he'd pretty much be cannon fodder at this time. And by the time it was over, he'd be right back to where he started, a step above an enhancement talent. And 2014 wouldn't go much better for him either. No, despite making one last attempt to get fans on his side again by starting a new YouTube series, Zack Ryder's Last Resort, all this led to was even less appearances on TV for him, as it became very clearly apparent WWE had no plans for the New Yorker. And after he tore his rotator cuff in November of that year, he'd return to the ring at the 2015 Royal Rumble, and there proceed to get eliminated in short order by Bray Wyatt. And by the time WrestleMania 31 came around, all he did was appear in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. Yes, he would get a brief boost when on the May 25th episode of Raw that year, he'd get to challenge John Cena for the United States title in his hometown. But that was only a fleeting moment, and once it was over, it would be right back to the bottom of the card again for Long Island IceZ. Thank God things would finally start to turn around for him in June of 2015 then, as that was when he began teaming up with Mojo Rawley to create the Hype Bros. Sure, it wasn't exactly a main event act or anything, but it at least gave Ryder something to do for the first time in a long time. That said, most of what he would do at this point would be head down to NXT to put over the likes of The Revival, American Alpha, and Enzo and Big Cass, a far cry from where he'd been just a few years before. But it wouldn't be like this forever. No, while the time for Zack Ryder to be a true main event star in WWE had seemingly passed by now, he would still get his moment in the sun as, after returning to the main roster in early 2016, he'd find himself being inserted into a 7-man ladder match for the Intercontinental title at WrestleMania 32. And to the shock of everyone, despite his opponents that night including names like Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Dolph Ziggler, The Miz, Stardust, and Sin Cara, he'd be the one who came out of the evening the winner. Yes, after all those years of struggling, Zack Ryder was now the Intercontinental Champion. Not that this would be a long reign for him or anything though, rather it would be more of a metaphorical gold watch as the following night on Raw, he dropped the gold right back to The Miz again. But even if it was short, it was still a career highlight for him, and a sign that there was still something he had which people were willing to get behind should he be presented in the right way. It's just a shame then that WWE had no intention of presenting him as a top player going forward, as all he would do for the remainder of 2016 and well into 2017 would be put over bigger names such as Rusev, Sheamus, and The Big Show. And when he wasn't doing that, he'd continue to partner with Mojo Rawley in the tag team division, with the pair usually coming out on the losing end by the time all was said and done. And while this was happening on screen, behind the scenes, Matt's personal life was booming, as it was around here that he began dating then TNA star Chelsea Green. And as 2017 was drawing to a close, he and Mojo Rawley went their separate ways, as Zack wanted to start working as a singles act again. How would this go for him? Not great at first. No, the truth is, Ryder did nothing of real note during 2018. In fact, it wasn't until 2019 that things picked up for him once more, as it was in the early months of this year that he reunited with his old friend and partner, Kurt Hawkins. And this all led to the pair getting their big moment on the WrestleMania 35 pre-show when they beat The Revival to not only end Hawkins' losing streak, but also win the Raw Tag Team titles. And after going on a 2-month reign with the belts, the duo would drop the belts back to the Revival on an episode of Raw later that year. And this would turn out to be the last thing of note that Ryder would do in WWE, as it was in April of 2020 he'd be part of a mass wave of releases from WWE, with this forcing him to make a decision about what he wanted to do with his future. Would he rest on his laurels and move over to the ex-WWE stars signs autographs at conventions phase of his career, or would he try to reinvent himself in a completely new environment? The latter, as it happened. Yes, following a couple of cameo appearances on Dynamite in the summer of that year where he came to the aid of his old buddy Cody Rhodes, the man now once more going by the name of Matt Cardona would rebuild himself from the ground up as the King of the Indies. Who was the King of the Indies exactly? Well, he was a guy who would travel to every corner of the globe to show just how talented he really is when given the opportunity to shine. And this new character would be presented as a heel, with the most nuclear levels of heat being saved for his appearances at Game Changer wrestling shows, the very place he first introduced a new spinner version of their world title after winning it from deathmatch legend Nick Gage at GCW Homecoming on July 24th, 2021. Of course, this wouldn't be the only place Matt Cardona would be appearing as the new decade fully got going. No, like any indie legend, he'd pop up anywhere and everywhere. Hell, his new gimmick of traveling belt collector would see him appear in places like DDT, MLW, NWA, and even TNA, with all of this leading to him at one point holding 9 separate titles at once. That said, most of this time would be spent working in the Impact Zone. With it being there, he not only locked horns with the likes of Ace Austin, W. Morrissey, and even Jordynne Grace, but where he got to work alongside Chelsea Green, the woman who had by now become his wife, in tag team action. In fact, so much fun would Matt have in TNA, he'd remain there all the way up until 2023, by which point he'd have become a one-time digital media champion. And all the while he was doing this, he was continuing to ply his craft elsewhere too, with it being around the same time that he also became a one-time NWA World's Champion in Billy Corgan's revamped version of the National Wrestling Alliance after he beat Trevor Murdoch for the honor. As time went on, though, the King of the Indies would have to start dropping the numerous titles he was collecting, and that meant doing so in bouts such as when he lost the GCW World Championship to Jon Moxley. Obviously, this match with Mox impressed somewhat at AEW then, because in recent months, Cardona has found himself returning to that ecosystem for a few one-shots when he not only appeared on the March 30th, 2024 episode of Collision to answer Adam Copeland's TNT title open challenge, but also showed up in Ring of Honor to try, and ultimately failed, to win the ROH World Championship from Chris Jericho at Final Battle on December 20th of the same year. Does this mean we can expect to see him sign a contract with AEW soon? Possibly. Or maybe we see him join his wife Chelsea Green in WWE and finish his story, much like Cody Rhodes did. Either way, we know Matt Cardona will make whatever he does a success, as he's proven now for the past 20 years, he's always ready to make the most out of any situation.